our community. So we thought we would take that chance to not only review our licensure law, but also certification issues, as well as other issues that would come up in the future. And we're still learning from that experience, because we passed that licensure, and then later on we realized, oh, you know, we need to clean something up, or we need to make an amendment, or... So we decided to seize the opportunity that we had at that time. I was the board liaison, and I asked Katie if she would be willing to support and work with us, WAD and WSRD at that time. So as the board liaison, I was the chair of SLIT. Yay! So it was important to know what was going on and be involved and advocate for what was happening in our community, both the interpreting community and the deaf community. And we wanted to make sure that we had the right checks and balances in place. So that group, let me see, that was October 2016, oh wait, no, January 2016, sorry about that, to October 2016. We met every month. So during that time, I believe it was 10 months of work. We were sending out feelers to gather information from the community. We wanted to know other people's opinions and perspectives. So we spent some time and compiled that information. So the purpose of our group was to make suggestions. Actually, let me back up for just a moment. So we gathered that information and compiled it. We reviewed it, analyzed it, and then with our experience and knowledge, we made suggestions to WAD and WSRD.
If you aren't aware who was on the Sign Language Interpreter Task Force, here we have the committee. We made a serious effort to include all stakeholders, because sometimes people feel like they're not included. So it was quite a big committee, and in some ways it really became impossible to meet and really include everyone in the decision. So, but we still wanted to pick the appropriate people for this committee. And one person I'd like to acknowledge is Representative Brostoff, who was extremely beneficial. His knowledge, awareness, and leadership, guidance, and everything was monumental, because I am not the expert when it comes to licensure and laws. He is, and he gave us a tremendous amount of advice and was really a foundational support in our work. So thank you, Representative Brostoff. Trying to see if anybody else in that committee is here. Leah was here. Leah's here. She was helpful with that committee also. She was one of the interpreters. Thank you so much for your service. Our committee, our task force, came up with 4 recommendations and priorities to focus on. As you can see them listed up here, the first one was deaf interpreters. And we felt like the current licensure law didn't really keep track of our deaf interpreters and what they really needed. It only applied really to hearing interpreters, and we wanted our law for licensure to be clearer. Because we know that the pathway for deaf interpreters is different than those of hearing interpreters. As we just mentioned, RID announced a moratorium, and we realized that would affect our community. So we thought, what happens if RID folds? What happens if we never have another certification test out of RID? What would we do? And so that prompted us to look at other ways that our interpreters could obtain licensure, and that meant other ways of getting certification. Another concern that we found let me back up. In 2010, when the law was passed, DPI and DSPS had an agreement. They developed a frequently asked questions sheet that would clarify where a DPI license could work versus a DSPS license. The problem with that was that the frequently asked questions was not legally binding. It wasn't written into the law. So really, that frequently asked questions paper had no clout to it. And it became fuzzy, people became confused, where can I work, where can't I work? It was a mess. So eventually they took it down from the DSPS website. And so with our task force, we recommended that an MOU be established. So that way we know what's going on with DPI and their interpreters and their licensures and DSPS. But with that, we want them to come together to be on the same page and agree in what should be appropriate. We don't want any bad feelings. We all want to be on the same page and respect each other's appropriate environments. The last priority was enforcement, and that was a big concern out of our community, our deaf community. With the law that was passed in 2010, let's say maybe your licensure expired. So then what do you do? Can you punish a person whose licensure is expired but they're still working? Within the law passed in 2010, it wasn't clear. It felt like it was a weak system. What was even the point? Where was the enforcement? There was nothing to it, and it was kind of a waste in some ways. So those were the 4 priorities that our task force established. And we recommended those to WAD and WSRID. And with our task force, we played with this possibility of what a new licensure could look like. And maybe some of you remember these handouts. These were just ideas, and we put these ideas together from your feedback and the town hall meetings and looked for how you felt about this information. And this is where our task force stopped and where this new committee picked up. And Zito will take it from here. Zito will explain that more in depth. So I jumped ahead of myself. So the SLID task force made recommendations to WAD and WSRID. Both of the presidents of their respective organizations decided that they wanted to form a new committee that would only focus on interpreter licensure issues. While the other 3 issues are just as important to both our communities, which includes deaf education, mental health, and the Deaf Commission, they wanted one committee to specifically focus on licensure. And that licensure focus became so they formed the legislative committee, which held these 4 priorities, and then they were broken into subcommittees. So for each subcommittee, as listed, a chairperson was picked. And for the interpreter licensure, Stephanie Zito was picked. Carla Gunn was asked to run the Deaf Education Committee. Katie and Eve, Kay Schmidt and Eve DeGreisman were asked to run the Mental Health Committee, and the Deaf Commission Committee is being run by Katie Voss. And Christina, obviously she's involved too. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I want you to be aware of the work that we are doing between our organizations. We want to be as transparent as possible, and we want your involvement. Especially the deaf community. We want you involved. We want you at the table. We want to make sure we are fulfilling needs within the interpreting community and the deaf community. Okay, so that's the history of this. I'm going to turn it over to Zito. And she will share all of her wonderful work, all of our wonderful work with you all now. Katie, can you come up and click the PowerPoint, or, I don't know, it's dead. Okay, hello, can you see me? As Pam explained, and as you can see, we have been focusing a lot on interpreting licensure from January to 2017 till now. We did our best to recruit anybody who was willing to be involved. The goal of our committee was to write a new bill in order to replace our current law. So we took the Sign Language Interpreter Task Force, slipped their recommendations, and played around with it. We bounced ideas off each other, we researched other state licensures, we researched other certifications, what other places are using for requirements, and then we came up with something and we sent out a survey to elicit feedback from the community. From the community's feedback and our committee and all of our experiences and all of these other stakeholders, as you can see, it's a variety of stakeholders, we did our best to include everybody's perspective. I believe within a 6-month time span, we met 40 different times, whether it was one-on-one meetings, group meetings, with all of these stakeholders. 40 different meetings within 6 months. I'm surprised I'm still alive here. So this included meeting with DSPS. It also included meeting with the legal writer who is under LRB. And that individual I worked with directly about, in terms of figuring out how to write a bill appropriately. We worked with DPI and ODHH. We talked about what the MOU should look like, where we have DSPS and DPI and where they need to come together. We worked with the Deaf Hard of Hearing Council under DPI. And with ODHH, we also talked to them about providing the BEI. I met with one individual the CDI advisor to RID, who had made recommendations for deaf interpreting pathway to certification, and I elicited his feedback. We met with agency owners from all over Wisconsin, including the northern area. We also worked with the State Court Interpreting Program Director, Carmel Capati. And then we talked to interpreters in our community who work in specialist fields such as mental health and legal. If you remember, we did at one point talk about having a separate, a possibility of a separate licensure for mental health and what that could look like. But most importantly, we wanted to make sure that we talked to the experts in the field, the ones who are actually doing the work. We had a deaf interpreter work group that met fairly frequently, and I've kept in contact with them. And they shared so many different perspectives from their own experiences as interpreters, just trying to get into the field. We worked with deaf individuals who want to become interpreters. It was a very rich experience to see what the perspectives were. We also worked with the Joint Legislative Committee and met with them fairly frequently also. It's a lot of meetings, as you can see, a lot of stakeholders to include. So we have all this information, this feedback. What happens next? Under our current law, we are not allowed to make amendments. We can't touch it, we can't do anything with it. It is what it is. We are stuck with it. That means that if we do want to make changes, we have to repeal it and replace it in its entirety. And I've had several people ask me, it's like, let's just change this one part. Unfortunately, we can't. We have to repeal the entire thing and replace it. But at the same time, that was a great opportunity for us to capitalize and fix where we saw loopholes and weaknesses. It was a way for us to learn from the previous law to build a better law. So from SLIT's recommendations and the feedback that we got from the community, we took all of this data, and it's a lot of data, we appreciate it, thank you, and we came up with a bill. And it's really important to me that you understand that RID system and BEI system are completely different. Some people are asking, why can't we just follow RID system? Why can't we follow BEI the way to do it? Unfortunately, that's impossible. Our goal here is licensure for the state of Wisconsin, and it's leveling the playing field between RID system and BEI system. And I will explain more of what I mean. So, I really value Representative Rostov and his time, and he's here tonight, and I appreciate you being here. Thank you. I thought maybe you could come up and briefly explain the process. We have a bill, we are ready, but what happens next? So, and what's his role in that too? And we, after that, later in this meeting, we'll discuss your role as community members and what you will need to do to help make this a success. So, Representative Rostov, could you come up?
Wait.
I'm just gonna hold this. Okay, so first of all, hey, I know most of you. For those that don't, I'm State Representative Jonathan Rostov, and I feel like we've been through so much together already. So we're kind of at the final stretch, and I'm really excited for that. And this is an important piece, obviously, that is kind of coming to a conclusion after many meetings and a long process. So great, we should all celebrate that. Where we're at right now is the bill has been drafted, so we have, and I have a copy with me, and I'm going to give my information, so if anyone wants it, I can email the language to you all, or okay, and it's on the website, so you can check it out. That's you know, something can also spread around and let other people know who weren't able to make it today but might be interested. The way it works is we have to get a bill drafted and then sent around in both houses. So I represent, you know, the Assembly, we have our senators. The exact same language for each bill has to go through the exact same process in both houses of our bicameral legislature. So it'll circle around for co-sponsorship. People will say, oh, this is a cool idea, you know, I want in on this. After that date, it'll be assigned to a committee, and then we have to work to make sure it actually gets in front of that committee, which is up to the leader of each house. In the Assembly, that's Robin Voss. In the Senate, it's Scott Fitzgerald. And we'll talk about that process again later, because we have to make sure that they actually allow it to come in front of committee. Once it goes in front of committee, we have to make sure that our advocates show up and explain exactly why it's so important, and you know, kind of educate the legislators who are on that committee as to what's going on, because most of them are not going to know about this. And then they'll ask some questions, and they'll, you know, give some suggestions, and it'll be done. Then after that, there'll be an executive session where the public is not allowed, but the committee members will speak among themselves. This usually happens within a week or 2 weeks of the initial meeting. And during that time, there'll be an internal discussion. People will usually give their kind of last pleas for why they're voting for or against a bill, and then it'll move forward. It'll either get voted up or down, but either way it'll go in front of the full floor, in front of all the Assembly members and all the senators. So the Assembly, will take a vote, and if it passes that, it'll move forward, and in the Senate they'll take a vote. If it passes that, it'll move forward. If it passes both houses with exactly the same legislation. It'll go in front of the governor's desk. The governor gets to sign it or not sign it, or veto it. But if the governor signs it, it becomes law. So that's the kind of path we're on. And there's, you know, there's a lot of work that's already been done on this that goes into the research, that goes into all the stakeholder meetings, that goes into kind of crafting the language exactly the way we want it. If you look at the text I have with me, if you look at the bill, it'll say 2200/04, right? And that's because it's on its 4th draft. So we've had to revise the language, we had to make sure it got exactly what we wanted, exactly the intent we wanted. We talked over and over and over with the lawyers. So this is it. And the reason why it took so long is we have to be very deliberative and make sure that we're not kind of letting this bill die, because once it gets brought forward, people are like, oh, actually we should have had this in there and that in there, and bring it back. Because for something like this, we just don't have that luxury, not to mention the time-sensitive nature, you know, obviously for your all livelihood and for the community. So that's where we're at, and I don't know if we're going to talk yet about how your role, because now you guys all have to make sure this passes. I have like 1 vote in the assembly, but I have like 56,000 bosses, and they're all my constituents, and you're all bosses of the politicians who represent you. It's not the other way around, although sometimes folks want to make it seem that way. So maybe we can get into that a little bit later, but that's kind of where we're at right now in the process. So we're almost there, final stretch. And I'll just say this too, you know, it's been such a pleasure working with everyone here, but I talked to Zito earlier today, I said, what time am I coming on? And, you know, we kind of discussed the timing of it. And I have 3 other events tonight, they're all in Milwaukee. I'm probably not going to make any of them. One of them is one of my good friend's 42nd birthday, and I'm going to make it up to him later. But part of the reason why I'm here tonight, I mean, I love seeing everyone's faces, but I'm extremely committed to this, and this is the final stretch, and we can't take our foot off the gas pedal now, so I'm trying to be an example of that. But we also need everyone in this room to really push now. This last stretch is going to be the most important because, well, every part of this is actually most important, but we need this part too. So we'll get into that later, but it's really, really important that you all are here, that people are motivated about this, and that we make our final push for this, because it's coming to an end of this process. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Rostov. We have, again, really appreciated working with you and your expertise and your motivation, and you've really inspired me to just keep going and be optimistic and know there's a light at the end of the tunnel. On that note, I'd like to talk about the proposed bill and the changes that are in that bill. We will have a break before we talk about some possible frequently asked questions. And this is probably the most boring part, so I apologize in advance. So currently, with our licensure, we have a restricted license and an unrestricted license. With the restricted license, you can only renew twice. And those come in 2-year cycles. I know it's been a struggle for you, and I know some of you guys didn't get all of your possible of 6 years with that license, but that can become the unrestricted license, which is renewable. As long as you kept up with your certification, you could keep your renewable or unrestricted license. So within the proposed law, it's divided into a licensure for our deaf interpreters and a licensure for our hearing interpreters. And within each of those categories, we have 2 licensures. And we've kind of nicknamed them yellow as our intermediate license, and green as our advanced license. So the deaf interpreters have an intermediate and advanced license, as do the hearing interpreters.
Okay, really, I'm a terrible presenter, right? I broke a ground rule. Number one, too much information on a slide. Oh yeah. So I'm trying to be nice. I posted this online for you. www.wisrid.org. And then if you click on committee, there's interpreter licensure option, and you can find it there. I believe the last PowerPoint had that, the last slide had that link as well. Okay, it's really important to remember. This law, we are trying to set up a minimum standard for BEI and RID certified interpreters. I didn't mention that because we've got this. I mentioned that because we have this. So you see this column, we have RID, then we have the BEI, general information, and then we have, let me see, five states who host the test. That means they provide the test within the state and have their own certification through BEI. Wisconsin is the last column on the right, and there is some to be determined information there. The other states include Michigan, Texas, Illinois, and Missouri. Those 4 states have their own columns that you can see here, and it's obvious that their requirements vary greatly. For example, let me see. Illinois requirements require a high school degree to take the test. Let's see, as opposed to Texas, you must have an associate's degree or higher, or some college credits, some sort of proof that you've taken classes. So it really, really runs the gamut of what is expected. Also, as far as CEU requirements, I mean, everybody's familiar with RID CEU requirements. So you have a 4-year cycle with RID, and you must have 80 hours of continuing education. Let me see, some continuing education, general studies, professional studies. That's pretty commonly understood. Now, understand that not everybody works on a 4-year cycle, the same 4-year cycle. Me, my certification, Christina's certification, Jake's certification, all of our cycles are different. It depends on when you obtained your certification. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, let's see. We've noticed that other states that host the BEI tend to require 20 hours annually of CEUs, period. 20 hours. So I'll go more in depth on that later. Let's see. It seems pretty standard. They all accept the RID, NAD, CPC, Code of Professional Conduct. So that, whether if you're certified through RID, BEI, you are expected to follow the CPC. So that's standard. And you can also take some time to really give this a good look through later on when you pull it up at home. One thing I'd like to mention, the RID test right now is a fail-pass. The BEI has 3 levels of testing for expressive. You can take the BEI Basic, you can take the BEI Advanced, and they have the Master test, the BEI Master. So they have 3 levels of expressing, as opposed to the RID, which has 1 test and it's pass-fail. So we were trying to figure out what equivalency was between the certifications. I have a point to this. Okay, again, state by state, their requirements and certifications vary. So our group had a huge amount of work set out for us to try to figure out what to do with it within Wisconsin. All right, here we go. So here in Wisconsin, all professions have a 2-year cycle for licensure, period. It doesn't matter if you're a hairdresser, it doesn't matter if you're an interpreter. All professional, legal professions, everybody runs on a 2-year licensure cycle. So a lot of people were asking, well, hey, why can't we just have our licensure on a 4-year cycle to match our ID? Unfortunately, we have to follow what the state has mandated.